HanselMinutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman, hosted by Carl Franklin. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 162, recorded live Wednesday, May 14th, 2009. Support for Hansel Minutes is provided by Telerik REP Controls, the most comprehensive suite of components for Windows Forms and ASP.NET web applications. Online at www.telerik.com. And by .NET Developers Journal, the world's leading .NET developer magazine. Online at www.sys-con.com. In this episode, Scott talks with developers Hal Rottenberg and Kirk Munro.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. I'm here in Los Angeles at TechEd North America 2009, sitting down with Hal Rottenberg from PowershellCommunity.org, and also now of Home Depot.
Hi, Scott.
Hey. And with Kirk Munro from Quest Software, makers of Power GUI.
Hey, Scott.
Hey, guys. So, PowerShell, I haven't done a show on PowerShell in a while. I used to be big-time hardcore PowerShell, because I was working in banking, and we had to manage a lot of machines.
Right.
We wanted to do something n times, and at the time, PowerShell was a thing. This was PowerShell 1.0. Mm-hmm. So about 2-3 years ago, probably 3 years ago even, and I had to write a remoting feature and make a service so my PowerShell applets could talk to each other. Mm-hmm. PowerShell was really powerful, but I still needed to do a lot of stuff. And I've dropped out, right? I've come to work for the big blue monster, and I don't have the need to manage more than 4 or 5 machines at a time. What have I missed in PowerShell? What's happened in the last 3 years in PowerShell?
Okay, well, you probably got in before 1.0 had even released at that point, 3 years ago.
Did a couple of betas?
Released 2.5 years ago, and but now we're coming up on Windows 7, of course, and 2008 R2. And Microsoft is going to be releasing PowerShell version 2 shipped with both of those operating systems.
Okay, so that means that Windows 7, I'm looking at my Dell Mini 9. Mm-hmm. I've got PowerShell on here already. Let me just hit this power. Yep, and there so I've got PowerShell, and it looks like I've got some kind of a PowerShell ISE on my.
That's version 2 right there.
And this is just the regular version of Windows 7. This isn't the fancy enterprise version that I've got. This is client edition.
It's shipping with all versions of Windows starting with 7.
Okay, rock on. So that means that, like you said, the 2008 R2, it'll just be there.
Mm-hmm. And which is great because now it's a requirement you don't have to satisfy. You don't have to think about installing it on your servers, installing it on all your PCs.
Okay, so what did I miss as far as what additions? New commandlets?
Well, yeah, of course there are going to be new commandlets, especially now that a lot of between version 1 and version 2, a lot of the product groups at Microsoft have really kind of gotten it now, and they're on the train. Mm-hmm. Version 1, I don't remember how many commandlets it came with, probably in the order of 250. Version 2 has over 500 commandlets shipping with it. When you include things like on the server SKUs, bits, and some other server related functions, there's a lot of stuff to go through.
Now, the word you're using is commandlet, which is actually spelled CMD. LETS.
Yeah,
right?
It kind of harkens back to command.exe, but it's, commandlet is just a bite-sized, task-oriented, this is what does, and it only does this. You have, it's a verb, noun, syntax. A lot of your listeners are probably familiar with, some of the concepts of PowerShell, but it's, instead of external executables, you have commandlets.
Right. Well, and we shouldn't assume that they're too familiar with it because, just when I think that everybody knows PowerShell, I realize that there's people who kind of know that it exists.
Well, they should really take the time to invest time and learn it.
Yeah. Well, that's why we're talking again, because I used PowerShell just today in a talk that I did on Velocity, which is a data caching system. And their administration tool that they ship, rather than shipping some kind of sad WinForms application, they shipped PowerShell commandlets. So they shipped, I think, like 20 cache-related things to start and stop the cache cluster.
Definitely.
And when you said about the verbs being verb noun, this is a standardized thing. If you want to ship a commandlet, there's a limited number of verbs, and you have to. It's not like one guy calls it get and the other guy calls it fetch, and someone else says retrieve. They have actually
there's a command. There's a very it's very formalized. And you guys have established that with the Common Engineering Criteria list. I want to say the 2009 version was when they first made it mandatory for the server SKU type products to ship with PowerShell support of some kind.
Okay.
And that's gotten even more formal in the subsequent versions. So, if you're if you work with Windows, PowerShell is going to be a part of your life, whether you like it or not. So it's time to get used to it and really kind of take advantage of what's there.
Personally, I come from a development background, which is probably like a lot of your listeners.
Which is a good balance here, because Kirk, you're coming from a point of view of a developer, and Hal, you're coming from the point of view of more of a large enterprise IT management perspective.
That's right. So I kind of bridge both roles today, but still mostly development. That's my full-time job. That's what I do every day. And, this consistency that you guys are talking about was just so key for me, because it allows me, for the first time with any language that I've experienced, be able to make intelligent guesses and be right like the vast majority of the time. You don't find that there is one commandlet that has -id as the parameter and another one that has -identity. Like, the consistency extends even inside the commandlet model, so that you can make intelligent guesses and get your work done more quickly.
And it would seem, you would think initially, as maybe if you're hearing this, that this would be constraining. It's almost like saying, well, here's C#, here's the formalized grammar of the language, and oh, by the way, you can only name your functions like this. You go, oh, wow, don't hold me back. Don't hold me down. But when you're talking about 500 commandlets, and then you add in things like exchange or velocity in my example, you're going to have a vocabulary of thousands and thousands of things that you could potentially want to call. You want that constraint.
Exactly.
Right? So you can just step in. I could probably step into exchange, which I know uses PowerShell now for its stuff. I assume they have a get mailbox.
Yes.
Get user. I'm just guessing.
Yes, absolutely they do. And so you can go in there and apply the same knowledge set that you get in basic PowerShell inside of all these various platforms.
Yeah, so the investment of time that you've made learning the basic PowerShell commandlets, you can take the set of verbs. You already know what the verbs, you know what get does. Get gets an object. Send takes a resource you have and, sends it somewhere else. And there's definitions for these you can find on Microsoft's site. And then, the set of nouns is related to the domain, which you're probably already familiar with.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And the thing that's most important, though, is the stringing together of these things. And the example that I always give is about getting a process, right? So you're on Unix, or star Nix, right? Start Nix, and you say PS, and you get your list of processes. And then let's say that I asked you as a task, as an IT guy, take the list of processes, find me the top 5 memory hogs.
Are you going to make me use sed and awk to do it?
Exactly, right. So what happens? You say PS, and then you pipe it through sed, and you pipe it through awk, and then it's regular, because you're messing with formatted text.
Right. So in PowerShell, everything's an object. Developers have been familiar with object-oriented concepts for a long time. Administrators have not been used to that. That's something new, but it's something that it's easy to take advantage of once you get the concept down, that you don't have to do the text parsing. You don't have to think of, okay, do I look at column 9 or 10 in this particular output? So I can always look at, I can take, for example, get-process, run that, give the name of a process that I want to work with, pipe it to stop process. I don't have to think about how the, point A gets to point B. That's that object that I'm passing on. Also,
with respect to everything being an object, as a developer, a lot of people are probably familiar with using reflection when they want to go in and get the details that aren't necessarily readily available. But PowerShell allows you to go and just ask the objects what you can do in terms of pipelining. You can take any object and pipe it to get member, and it'll spit out a list of all the properties and all the methods that are there for you. And so you can very easily see the syntax. And so where you can't guess, you can ask, and you don't have to go and revert to documentation. You can just learn it directly using PowerShell itself.
So both of you have said this pipe it to. When you do this, and you just pipe it to that, pipe it to this. The example of get process, say, get process, explore exe, pipe, stop process. The output of get process explore exe is actually a process. It's not it's a CLR type. It's the process object that we're used to using. So you as a C# developer would be familiar with, I think was it system.diagnostics?
That's right, system.diagnostics.process.
So that's a class you would write in C#.
Yes.
And then you use the same class. So you're speaking the same language in the sense that if I go and say, let's say dir, which is actually an alias for get child item.
Yes.
That's going to return a file info, the same one that you're used to using as a C# developer.
Yes. And because it's based on this whole model, and because it's based on sitting on top of .NET, you can just go and use .NET directly inside of it. It supports that. So where the commandlets aren't available, you can just, if you're a developer, you can just write functions or just do ad hoc scripting and invoke .NET directly. You don't have to worry about going and building your own custom commandlet, compiling the code, and importing it in. You just do it right in PowerShell.
Yeah. So then in the get process example, when I pipe it to stop process, I don't actually even give any input or command line things to stop process.
That's right.
It takes the process as input naturally. It knows that that's the thing it acts upon, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And one of the things I thought was really amazing is you call get process or something like that. You pipe it to stop process, and the part that always freaks people out is you go dash what if.
Yeah, what if is great. What if is like kind of standard across the board for all PowerShell commandlets, and it allows you to basically say, what if I was going to do this? What would it do? And it'll spit back to you some text output saying it's going to stop the process on certain system, whatever name you specify.
Mm-hmm. And when you're doing big operations, you can most everything supports what if, doesn't it? I can say like, what if I deleted this, and what if I stopped that process?
Yeah, and there's a set of several of these common parameters. What if is one of them. You also have confirm is another one.
Aren't they called the ubiquitous parameters?
Yeah,
right. They're kind of like required 4 or 5.
Right. So there's a flag you set when you're creating a commandlet, and you just automatically get all of those.
Mm-hmm. Now, the idea that I'm going to pass something in and it just is understood that this is the default kind of thing that I would act upon, like stop process, acts upon processes, is pretty powerful. But the automatic binding of parameters, I think, is really interesting because there's a thing called import CSV.
Right.
That I find myself using all the time. Do you use that command?
Yeah, I've used import CSV. It is pretty neat that you can take, what this flat file, comma separated, obviously, and you don't have to think about parsing the. Have you ever, your developer in VBScript working with text files and especially comma separated values, it was common to do so, but you had to insert all these CHR34 strings and so forth. And
well, it's because it wasn't a kind of a native thing. A good example would be to just make like I did a thing with virtual machines once. I had a CSV file and I said name, comma, it was like machine name, right? Comma, what was it like? I don't know, username or whatever. So it was like name, comma, ID, comma, something. And then I said import CSV, and then this turns automatically into kind of a structured table of values. But then PowerShell immediately knows that there's a name column and a computer name column and a whatever column.
Yes, and you can see that used when you're pipelining. So, I mean, I've seen examples where you have an HR department that gives somebody a text file, here's some new users coming into the company, and it's CSV, and they have to go make those new users. So you don't have to use any UI for it. You can just import the CSV file and pipe it to a commandlet like a new QAD user and go ahead and just create your users because you already have all the fields set, whichever ones are important to you.
Right. And the thing that's interesting and that's almost magic is that if you have an ID column and like, for example, let's say you had a list of processes and process ID was one of the column names and the command that you're piping into expects a parameter called process ID, it'll just assume, well, you didn't give me anything. These line up. That must be, how does it, what those are called? Is it bindable?
Yeah, they're bindable properties.
Bindable properties.
Yes. Yeah.
That's magic.
Absolutely. Automagic.
It seems like most magic, the things that I'm so easily impressed with are effectively for loops, right? The idea that, hey, I've got a virtual machine. I can start and stop it with a PowerShell commandlet. Oh, let's do 100 of those. Oh, let's do 1,000,000 of those.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the first things that I saw in PowerShell that just blew me away with how easy it is to work with in anything.
Why are we so impressed by N+1? I don't know why that's
I don't know why, but it's just, working with, batch files, for example. You had your 4/F,
Oh gosh, I challenge you. I challenge any one of my listeners to do a for loop in a batch file without Googling for it first.
Oh yeah. It's impossible and crazy, and the syntax you just messed up.
For something with a lot of percentages in.
Yeah. Doing the same kind of thing with PowerShell, whether it's, reading through lines in a text file or starting virtual machines like you're talking about. It's just so simple. Mm-hmm. Virtual machines, kind of brings up something, of a, soft spot in my heart.
Well, yeah, because you wrote a book on managing virtual machines with PowerShell.
Right. It's managing, VMware infrastructure with PowerShell, TFM, by Sapient Press. That's a book I just finished up, recently, just started shipping the other day, in fact. And, so VMware, they were one of the earlier companies to, third party, to ship commandlets for PowerShell. There were a couple that were before them, but they were, one of the earlier, ones to jump on the bandwagon.
Right.
And, I hadn't gotten involved with them and, just had the opportunity to write a book about it. It was a pretty, neat experience, but they, have, over 120 commandlets that they shipped.
So why do I need, a virtual machine, start machine, stop machine, hibernate? There's 3. I'm done. What do I need another 100 commandlets
Well, I
for
mean,
virtual
yeah,
machines.
you've got start and stop and remove and add and new and set.
Oh,
But think about all the different nouns that we've got to work with. Specific. Some of these are specific to VMware products, but a lot of them map directly to Hyper-V or any other virtualization type product. You've got virtual machines you're going to work with. You've got the host servers, various structures when you're managing like folders and data centers. And then don't forget the virtual networking. You've got switches.
Oh, I see. So you could actually kind of create these, configure these completely from scratch. Totally what they would say headless.
Yeah.
You never actually touch the machine or see the machine. It's just out there.
Yeah. It would
name and a
be
word.
trivial to create a script that would, go from 0 to creating, 100 virtual machines, various different, based on templates that you'd created beforehand. Maybe you had a, server application, a database application and, client PCs. And just arrange it just so, and you just hit go, and it goes off and does it.
Do you know how to make the possible out of the impossible? Well, the .NET ninjas at Telerik do. They just released a huge pack of web controls, all built on top of ASP.NET Ajax, that'll help you build impossibly fast and interactive applications in no time at all. They've made the impossible possible in desktop development. If you think you can't have a carousel component in WinForms, well, you can. Their Windows Forms suite features a super powerful grid view control and 32 other crazy desktop components that'll give you dazzling WPF-like features, but in WinForms. They do the same thing in reporting solutions with a new design surface like nothing else, looks just like graph paper, gives you advanced page layout capabilities, makes it feel more like a graphic design software than a reporting solution. Go check them out at Telerik.com and be a .NET Ninja. And thanks for listening. Now, back in the day, a team that I was working with at Carillion, which is the company that I worked at before Microsoft, now called CheckFree, was using PowerShell to automate this system such that after MS build in our continuous integration server would finish the build, we wouldn't just kind of drop a bunch of binaries in a folder and say, hey, that's the build. We would actually create and fire up a virtual machine using a PowerShell, install the bits into that, and then basically got to the point where we could automate the creation and the testing of this build so that a virtual machine was the artifact of the build. And we thought we were pretty awesome when we did that.
I think you're pretty awesome.
Well, thank you. But it was 3 years ago, and I had to write a bunch of stuff in order to remote into that virtual machine to poke stuff into it, and that was a real hassle.
Yeah.
What is PowerShell 2 going to fix that? Can I remote into?
Yeah. PowerShell 2 remoting is one of the very big features that's coming out with version 2. It's based on WS Management, which is an XML based protocol, and based on standards that have been well defined. In fact, it's not a Microsoft
So it is a standard.
standard.
It's not a Microsoft thing.
Right. It's not a Microsoft thing.
Because you used to work for IBM.
I did.
So you like this?
Oh, I like this a lot.
Oh, that's good. So we can be friends then.
Awesome.
Okay, good.
So the PowerShell version 2 remoting, what you can do with it is, it's as simple as running a background job on your own PC, like you might do with an ampersand on a Linux box.
Let me guess. New -job.
I don't remember.
It would have to be, wouldn't it? Because it's a convention.
Yeah. And there's also a common parameter called as job, which you see on some commandlets.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is a new parameter. So like what if is everywhere. So some commandlets I can just run as a job.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So that's one aspect of it. And then you also have the remoting feature where you could, for example, open up a shell to a remote system and take advantage of commandlets that it has on its system and whatever resources are on that remote system. And then you can invoke scripts either, against one system or against 100 systems.
Something else that's kind of cool about the whole remoting feature, with it being based on WS Man, that puts WS Man support directly into PowerShell. So when you have large hardware vendors like Intel and HP providing WS Man interfaces directly into their hardware, so you can even power on and power off machines using WS Man.
Really?
In new technology today, you can. Intel has vPro. I forget what HP has, but most of the hardware vendors have this solution. And they've even showed a demo here at TechEd showing how you can use PowerShell with WS Man, power on your machine, power it off. While it's off, look at the events on the machine.
While it's off.
While it's off.
It's still on, but
yes, there is a chip inside that is still responding to WS Man requests.
Really?
And allowing you to check out machine accounts and everything. So for your scenario you were talking about at Carillion, was that? Yeah. This is even great because you can have your machines totally offline and automate the turning on, doing the work, and shutting them down when you're done.
Wow, that's pretty slick. Now, so some people might say, oh, they added remoting to PowerShell, right? Welcome to 1975. We've just created secure sockets. This is not just that. It's not just like Telnet and I get a command prompt on a remote machine, right?
No, it's not just like Telnet. Now, to be fair, company and software, they had actually worked on an SSH-based remoting solution for PowerShell, which was kind of novel, and there's some neat stuff you can do with that. But no, these guys, Jeffrey Snover and the team, have thought long and hard about this, and there's a lot of cool things that they've enabled that go along with the remoting, such as restricted run spaces. So
right, we should talk about what a run space is, because I think that's interesting, because within the context of hosting stuff within my application, like for example, I just recently did a demo where I hosted IronPython. Basically, Python was a scripting language, and I did some work with it. And I can understand I can host run spaces and run PowerShell commands within C# applications.
Yes, and so you can create as many run spaces as you need to, each one being their own encapsulated environment working with PowerShell. Mm-hmm. So a run space is almost like it's a PowerShell session. We can open up a new run space and work with variables and commands inside that environment without polluting other run spaces.
Okay. I remember that I did something with run spaces a couple of years ago. I wrote what was it called? It was Logo. Remember the little turtle game?
Yes.
I wrote a Logo application where I had a robot that it would control.
Very cool.
And I was thinking about some of the security ramifications of that, because I basically put it. PowerShell could have done anything. I could have typed in format C:, and it would have gone off and done that. I mean, is this secure by default? I mean, could I hurt myself by hosting run spaces?
You could hurt yourself, but as an IT admin, you can configure run spaces so that they're restricted. You can assign what commandlets can actually run inside of a run space and define pretty granularly what
like
options
a white
you
list.
can do. Absolutely.
Okay. Cool. Now, you're working at Home Depot. Are you going to do anything with this on a large scale? Are you going to put this on, I don't know, Home Depot most has thousands of machines.
Well, they have 2,300 stores. And believe it or not, they have an average of 30 PCs in every store.
30 PCs at Home Depot?
30 PCs. And that includes a point-of-sale system, too.
Sure, that's a lot of machines, though.
But yeah, it is a lot of machines.
Okay.
So one of my responsibilities is going to be to work on the monitoring team. Going to be pulling out, instrumentation data off of these PCs that are currently not monitored using PowerShell. So I'm going to be putting PowerShell on, 100,000 plus nodes.
Okay, so you're going to put PowerShell on 100,000 machines. They're all running Windows something else, right?
Most of them are XP presently.
Okay, so you'll put PowerShell on XP, PowerShell 2.
Probably 1, depending on the time frame of this project, but 2 is definitely in scope of feature.
And then once that's on there, and you've got admin because you're a powerful IT guy, you can ask these machines anything, because then you've got WMI, right? And there's a lot of WMI support built in. And WMI, for a long time, to me, felt like this kind of weird foreign.
It's funny how WMI has kind of come around. It used to be something that used to always interest me, but it was hard to work with.
So another language, another universe, parallel universe in Windows.
Yeah, especially if you look at WMIC, which is a command line executable used to enumerate and work with WMI. The syntax of it is just awful. It's just crazy to work with. But working with WMI and VBScript was pretty bad. There was, it's like 15 lines to really get into the actual class that has the data you need. PowerShell, it's one command, like get-WMI object, and you give the name of, Win32 -- baseboard or whatever.
So there's a node. It's
enter.
like a tree you're wandering around.
Yeah, and you've got classes of objects, and there's various inheritances, but there's a lot of built-in ones, and they're common to all PCs.
Okay, so this is important. So I can ask with WMI using this common format, I can say, how many processors does it have? If I remember correctly, I could go down in some instances and see if it has fans, what I can do with those fans.
That's exactly the type of thing that I'm going to be looking at.
Really?
Fans, case temperature, that sort of thing.
You can tell temperature?
Yeah, if the manufacturer has written a WMI provider, definitely.
Because I know that I've got the temperature thing, because I can see it in my BIOS, and I know I have the fans. And sometimes I can see different applications that will let me, I can install fan control and different stuff like this. But, it all really depends on whether or not that motherboard provider has some provider that kind of bridges the gap between however their motherboard speaks.
Exactly.
Fan.
And in my case, I'm working with Hewlett-Packard computers that have what they call client management interface, I think is what they call their set of providers made to bridge that gap that you're talking about.
Okay.
WMI also brings some additional functionality to the table, not just for managing general computer use, but if you look at systems like Hyper-V. Right now, if you're going to use Hyper-V today and you want to do
Hyper-V being Microsoft's virtualization platform.
Then they don't provide commandlets out of the box. You can use System Center System Center Virtual Machine Manager 2008, which has commandlets that work against Hyper-V. Or if you don't have that solution, then you can use WMI. So for PowerShell users, you're not stuck wondering when are they going to have commandlets, because you can just use the WMI
Well,
interface.
and 3 years ago, we were using, what was it, Virtual Server 2005. I was using the COM interface to that to start and stop my VMs, and it was working quite nicely.
Yeah, and that's a cool thing about PowerShell is it didn't throw anything away. So you still have access to these thousands of COM objects that have been on your system since Windows 95. You also have ADSI, which is a interface that administrators have been familiar with working in VB script. It's still there. It's still accessible.
Now, the format for PowerShell, it's a little obtuse. And once you get multiple lines, stringing commands, and then for each object and curly braces, it's a little baroque. Once you get to 4 or 5 lines long, what do you guys use to rather than just writing all this the command line? I mean, you can't really go in Visual Studio and write these scripts.
No, that is an often asked question why you can't do it in Visual Studio, but they don't have color coding for it right now, for example. There's several third-party applications that you can use to help enhance. Microsoft kind of started a trend calling the integrated scripting environment.
That's what the ISE thing. So
Right.
I said that when I looked at my Dell here, I got PowerShell ISE. It looks like a little query analyzer.
Yeah.
For PowerShell.
So there's a few in this class. You've got IDEA's PowerShell Plus, and that has IntelliSense, syntax highlighting, and you've got a shell, and you've got an editor, and you also have, of course, PowerGUI.
So PowerGUI, this is your company's product or one of your company's products, PowerGUI?
Yes. Yeah. At Quest, we do a lot of different solutions, but PowerGUI is the product I specifically work on day in and day out. And so that's that's personal bias, of course, since I work there.
But you're hosting the run space, right? So you've written an application in some language, maybe C#.
Yes.
And you're hosting PowerShell inside of that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And it runs exactly as it would run if I ran it somewhere else.
Yes.
Okay. So you do all of your editing. So you're living in your own application all day long writing PowerShell
Yes, because it
scripts.
gives me my syntax highlighting and IntelliSense. So as a developer, the key things I look for, I have that in PowerGUI. It gives those to me today.
And can I make when I make a commandlet, I write the commandlet in C# though, or in VB in a .NET language. What's the difference between when would I write a script and when would I run a commandlet? Because we struggled with this years ago. We never knew really. We'd get scripts, and the next thing you know, you've written 1,000 lines of script, and you go, that really should have been a commandlet.
Yeah, it's a fine line. I mean, in V1, you have functions available to you, or you can go ahead and write the commandlet. Functions is great because you can prototype it and do it up quickly inside of PowerShell, but you're not necessarily going to get the same performance you can out of a compiled module. So depending on your needs, you may want to go to the commandlet. In V2, you can actually do what's called an advanced function, which it brings functions and commandlets even closer together and allows you to specify the parameter bindings and things you couldn't previously do in functions in version 1.
So this is a script that looks like a commandlet.
Yes, and it's all written entirely in PowerShell.
Okay, so I don't have to go and say get-Hanselman.ps1 or whatever the extension is. It looks and behaves like it's really there and built into the system.
Yes, even includes help. They even added get help support for functions, so you can get the rich help for these things.
So that means that there's more of a pathway than if I get caught up in a script and I say, well, this should have been a commandlet. I remember when I was talking with Jeffrey, it really requires a lot of thought. Jeffrey Snover, the architect of PowerShell, and it was Bruce Payette, the designer of the language. If you want to make a really good system that handles commandlets, you have to think about the domain. It really needs to be a domain-driven design. What is it we're trying to accomplish? What are the objects that are going to pass over our pipes and how they're going to interact? And I don't think that I know I didn't do that on the version 1 of my PowerShell-based system.
As a PowerShell consumer now for 2 years, that's generally how I find I write my functions today, is I will try to package them up almost like it would be a snap-in that you would import, but it's just a function library.
Okay, so snap-in, so with all the buzzwords, Kirk, what's wrong? So snap-in, for our listeners who may not know what a snap-in is.
Snap-in is a compiled module that you can import into PowerShell version 1, and that's how you add commandlets for VMware or Exchange 2007.
Right.
In version 2, that changes slightly, so they have the new concept of modules, which is basically a big brother to snap-ins. So you can now import type libraries directly from DLLs, and you don't have to do just adding a snap-in that is contains nothing but commandlets.
Okay, so then just like the snap-ins that we're used to in MMC, where I can go file, add snap-in, and have management ability, and it appears in a node in a tree, I can do the same thing in PowerShell.
Yes, you can do add-ps snap-in in version 1, or in version 2, you can do import-module.
And then your product, Power GUI, is kind of a mix of the two. It's kind of MMC and PowerShell, where I can import snap-ins and modules and get a similar experience. The
Yes.
best of both worlds, both MMC and PowerShell.
Yeah, because we have a second part that's the MMC side of the fence, which has an MMC-like UI that's powered by PowerShell scripts behind the scenes, and that's my primary task at work, is fleshing out these power packs. That's basically our name for a collection of these scripts.
So for the developers, and I'm suspecting that my audience is 80% developers, more developers than not. When should they look for opportunities to use PowerShell? And I don't mean they should just make up an opportunity, but PowerShell is definitely a solution. What are the kinds of problems that they're going to want to solve?
Yeah, it's funny that I took the mic, as the administrator answering this question. I want to say to the developers that whenever you want your application, okay, you make plans, you have a way that you design your program, and you think that you know how it ought to be used, but
Right.
you're wrong. You don't know how it's going to be used.
Okay.
So you're gonna be right most of the time, hopefully.
Sure.
But when it lands in the pits and when people are sitting down and using it in the real world, they're going to need to extend it. They're going to need to tie it to other things. And whether you're hosting a PowerShell instance in your application, whether you are, shipping a set of commandlets, by integrating PowerShell in with your product, you're giving the users the glue that they need.
You're allowing them to script it. You're allowing them to compose it with other things.
Right.
There's a couple of other key scenarios that PowerShell brings to developers that I used when I was just starting using PowerShell. If you're doing support for a customer and you're trying to figure out what's going wrong and they're already using a .NET-based application, well, you can use .NET directly in PowerShell, and you don't have to think about, am I installing Visual Studio on this person's system to debug it? You don't need to. You can just go and throw in one of these fancy editors that allows you to step through the code and just do this directly in PowerShell. So that's a great support opportunity for developers to use today.
That's interesting. My mom is running the Windows 7 RC now, and every once in a while I'll use remote desktop to run into her machine. Now you got me thinking that I might go and write some PowerShell scripts to help her debug some of the problems that she has day by day. Aren't the new troubleshooter packs that are built into Windows 7, you guys know about these? If you have a problem with something in Windows 7, like for example, yesterday I couldn't figure out why transparency wouldn't turn on. So I typed in fix, and I'm typing in transparency, and then it says, find and fix problems with transparency. And I hit enter, and this nice dialog box comes up, and I said to myself, oh wow, that's cool. And then I started doing a little bit of searching around. This is PowerShell, isn't it, that's doing this work?
I believe so, yes. Behind the scenes, they have some troubleshooting modules for PowerShell.
And we can write them ourselves.
Absolutely.
And that's pretty cool. I noticed that because I'm using a tool to raz in to work. And when I installed that tool on my machine so I could VPN into work, they installed a troubleshooter. Oh, really? Which gets me thinking about what a person who has a product could do to install troubleshooting packs to find and fix simple problems, and using PowerShell. And of course, in this example, as the user, I would never know that this was using PowerShell.
For sure. And even when you're talking about troubleshooting and fixing users' problems, I mean, as a developer, you're dealing with customers who have, a certain version of your application, and they may want some new features. Those new features may end up closing a sales deal if they have those features, and you might not have them baked in. So, I mean, alternatives are that you scramble and try to put those into a compiled module, or maybe you use something like PowerShell to come in and fill in the blank as a stopgap measure until you can actually go and put those features into your product. And that's something else I've done in the past that I found very handy.
Well, I'm looking forward to the ubiquity of PowerShell, the idea that when everyone gets up on these newer operating systems, that it'll just be there. Now, I won't be able to just send it to someone. I can't just email you, Hal, a .ps file and double-click and then take over your computer, right?
No, you can't. And of course, Microsoft learned some lessons from VBScript and, the I Love You virus and Melissa and all that. By default, you're only going to be able to execute scripts that have been signed on your local PC.
Okay, so you're basically not able to run scripts at all, right? Because I don't have any signed scripts lying around.
That's exactly right. There's several levels that you can set it to. For example, you can say remote sign. So any script that you create on your PC will run without having to sign it. But anything you've downloaded from the internet will be tagged, and you can't run it unless it's signed. And then you could set it all the way down to unrestricted if you like.
Okay. Well, very cool. Well, thanks so much, you guys, for talking to me today. We've got Kirk. They can check out your stuff at PowerGUI.
Yes, at powergui.org.
PowerGUI.org. And then Hal, PowerShellCommunity.org.
That's right.
And you guys, you have forums and things?
Yeah, we have forums, and we try to raise the bar of PowerShell awareness in general and give resources to people.
Cool.
And we'd like to support local user groups as well.
All right. And then if the listeners want to see me suffering with PowerShell 1.0 3 years ago, I've got a PowerShell category on my blog, and I think I might go and write myself a troubleshooter in PowerShell and install it into Windows 7. Cool. Well, thanks so much, guys, for talking to me today. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.